The fluorescent lights of Wilson's pharmacy cast harsh shadows across Maya Collins's tear-streaked face as she clutched her 9-month-old daughter Zoe tightly against her chest. The baby's skin burned with fever, her small face flushed an angry red as she whimpered weakly. Maya stood at the prescription counter, her voice breaking as she spoke to the pharmacist. "Please, there must be something you can do," she pleaded, digging through her worn wallet with trembling fingers. "I only have $37. The insurance declined it again." The pharmacist, an older woman with kind eyes and graying hair, looked genuinely pained. "I'm sorry, but this antibiotic costs $98 without insurance coverage. Have you tried applying for the Medication Assistance Program?" Maya nodded, another tear escaping down her cheek. "The application is still processing. It takes 2 weeks, and Zoe's fever has been over 102 for almost 2 days now. The doctor said if it doesn't come down by tomorrow, I need to take her to the emergency room." Her voice cracked on the last words, knowing that an ER visit would plunge her further into debt. At 24, Maya had been barely scraping by since Zoe's father abandoned them 3 months after learning about the pregnancy. Her job as a waitress at a local diner provided just enough for their tiny apartment and basic necessities, but unexpected medical bills were impossible to manage. She'd already borrowed money from her equally struggling friends and had nothing left to pawn. Behind Maya in line, a tall man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit observed the exchange. James Harrington, CEO of Harrington Pharmaceuticals, had stopped by this small-town pharmacy on his way to the airport, simply because his driver needed to pick up motion sickness medication for the flight. At 45, James had built his company from the ground up, turning it into one of the most successful mid-sized pharmaceutical companies in the country. The locals didn't recognize him. This wasn't his hometown. "Excuse me," James said, stepping forward. His deep voice carried a quiet authority that made both Maya and the pharmacist look up. "I couldn't help overhearing. Please fill the prescription." He pulled out his wallet and placed a sleek black credit card on the counter. Maya stared at him, confusion mixing with desperation on her face. "I can't accept that. You don't even know me." James met her gaze steadily. "A child needs medicine. It's that simple." He turned to the pharmacist. "And please add any other pediatric medications she might need. Fever reducers, electrolyte solutions, anything appropriate for an infant with an infection." The pharmacist nodded and quickly began processing the prescription. Maya shifted Zoe to her other arm, the baby's fevered weight growing heavier by the minute. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked, wary despite her desperate situation. Instead of answering immediately, James reached into his jacket pocket and extracted a business card. "James Harrington, Harrington Pharmaceuticals," he said, handing it to her, "and I have a proposition that might help beyond today. Come with me now." Maya's eyes widened as she recognized the company name, a regional pharmaceutical manufacturer that had been in the news for its charitable programs. Still, suspicion flared. "I don't know you," she said firmly, protective instinct overriding gratitude. James nodded respectfully. "Of course, I'm suggesting we go to the cafe across the street. Very public, very safe, where you can give your daughter the first dose of medicine while we talk. My driver can wait." He gestured toward the window where an elegant black car was parked. "I'm heading to the airport in an hour, so this won't take long." The pharmacist returned with a bag containing the antibiotic and several other medications. "Here you go, Ms. Collins. Instructions are on each bottle. The gentleman has taken care of everything." Maya accepted the bag with murmured thanks, her mind racing. As they stepped out of the pharmacy into the crisp autumn air, she made a quick decision. 20 minutes in the cafe, that's all." James simply nodded. Inside Sweet Brew Cafe, Maya carefully administered the first dose of antibiotic to Zoe using the provided dropper, along with some infant fever reducer. The baby fussed but swallowed the medications, then settled against her mother's shoulder, exhausted from fighting the infection. "My company has been developing a program," James began once they were seated, a coffee in front of him and a tea for Maya that she hadn't touched. "We're looking for participants in a healthcare initiative focused on single parents and their children. Comprehensive coverage, minimal paperwork, no cost for the first year while we gather data on effectiveness." Maya's eyes narrowed. "And what's the catch? Nobody gives something for nothing." James smiled slightly. The catch is good publicity, tax benefits, and data that helps us develop better healthcare models. We're a business, but one that's trying to find sustainable ways to make healthcare more accessible. He paused. We need 50 families for the pilot program. You would be number 48. As Maya processed his words, Zoe stirred and began to cry again. She rocked her daughter gently, noticing with relief that her skin already felt slightly cooler to the touch. I don't understand why me. There are thousands of people in similar situations. Sometimes meaningful change happens in unexpected moments, James replied. I wasn't planning to recruit anyone today, but seeing you in the pharmacy... He trailed off, something shifting in his expression. My sister was in your position once. Young, alone with a sick child, no money for medicine. Her story ended differently. The unspoken tragedy hung in the air between them. Before Maya could respond, James's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and straightened. I need to leave for the airport. Here's my card with my personal number. Call me tomorrow if you're interested in the program. He hesitated, then added, whether you call or not, the medicine is yours. No strings attached. As he stood to leave, Maya found her voice. Wait. Why would you tell me about your sister? James paused, his hand on the back of the chair. Because sometimes we're given chances to change the narrative. My sister's name was Maya, too. With that, he walked out, leaving Maya staring after him as Zoe's cries quieted to soft hiccups. Outside the window, she watched as he spoke briefly with his driver before climbing into the black car. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, leaving Maya with a decision that could change everything. If she could bring herself to trust a stranger's unexpected kindness. What she didn't know was that James Harrington had recognized more than just her name. He had recognized the distinctive birthmark on baby Zoe's wrist, a mark identical to one his niece would have had she lived. Maya remained in the cafe long after James had departed, cradling Zoe, who had finally drifted into a fitful sleep. The business card felt heavy in her pocket, its embossed lettering a tangible reminder of the strange encounter. Through the window she watched as evening shadows lengthened across the street, the pharmacy's neon sign flickering to life against the darkening sky. Can I get you anything else, honey? The waitress, a woman in her 50s with platinum blonde hair piled high, approached with a pot of fresh tea. No, thank you, I should get going, Maya replied, but made no move to leave the warmth of the cafe. The thought of returning to her cramped apartment with its leaky faucet and temperamental heater held little appeal, especially with a sick baby. The waitress, Doris, according to her name tag, set down the pot anyway and slid into the seat opposite Maya. I saw what happened earlier, she said, nodding toward the pharmacy across the street. That was James Harrington, wasn't it? Maya looked up, surprised. You know him? Not personally, but everyone in Bristol knows of the Harringtons. Their family built this town, practically. Doris poured herself a cup of tea, making herself comfortable, though James hasn't been back much since the tragedy. Tragedy? Maya found herself asking, despite her usual reluctance to engage in gossip. Doris lowered her voice, though the cafe was nearly empty. His sister. She was just a teenager when she got pregnant. The family tried to keep it quiet, sent her away to have the baby. But there were complications. She shook her head, sadly. Neither survived. James was away at college when it happened, but he came back and had a terrible falling out with his father over how they handled it. Left town, started his company, and rarely returns. His parents still live in that big house on Maple Hill, but they might as well be ghosts for all they engage with the town. Maya digested this information, looking down at Zoe's sleeping face. The coincidence of names, Maya, felt eerie now, knowing the history. He mentioned his sister, but not that this was his hometown. Well, it's not something the Harringtons discuss openly, Doris replied, standing up and smoothing her apron. But it changed James. Before, he was just another rich kid destined to join his father's law firm. After, he started that pharmaceutical company with a mission. Some say it's his way of making amends, though he had nothing to be sorry for. He was the only one who stood by his sister. As Doris walked away, Maya's mind raced. The strange connection felt too significant to dismiss as coincidence. She gathered her things, careful not to wake Zoe, and left enough money to cover her untouched tea, plus a modest tip. Outside, the autumn air had turned chilly. Maya wrapped the baby's blanket more securely around her before starting the 6-block walk to their apartment. The streetlights cast pools of yellow light on the sidewalk, moths fluttering frantically around the bulbs. Despite the mundane setting, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had shifted in her life's trajectory. In her apartment, she laid Zoe in her crib, relieved to feel that her fever had decreased noticeably. The medication was working. Maya moved to the window, looking out at the unfamiliar town she'd moved to just 3 months ago, seeking lower rent and a fresh start. Bristol, with its quaint main street and surrounding hills, had seemed as good a place as any to rebuild their lives. Now, learning it was James Harrington's hometown, and potentially the place where his sister had died, added a layer of complexity to their chance encounter that Maya couldn't ignore. Had he truly stopped at that particular pharmacy by coincidence? And what of that moment when he'd glimpsed Zoe's birthmark? Maya pulled out the business card, running her finger over the embossed lettering. The healthcare program he'd mentioned sounded too good to be true, yet his grief over his sister had seemed genuine. People like Maya rarely got breaks in life. She'd learned that lesson repeatedly since childhood. But the thought of comprehensive healthcare for Zoe, no more panicked trips to the pharmacy, no more choosing between medicine and rent, was too tempting to dismiss outright. She placed the card on her nightstand and checked on Zoe once more. The baby's breathing had steadied, her sleep deeper and more peaceful than it had been in days. Maya felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen for the first time since Zoe's fever had spiked. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would call the number and find out if James Harrington's offer was genuine. For tonight she would allow herself to hope that perhaps, just this once, fortune had decided to smile upon them instead of turning away. What Maya couldn't know was that across town, in the grand house on Maple Hill, James Harrington stood in his childhood bedroom, having cancelled his flight. He stared at an old photograph of his sister, 16, bright-eyed, with the same determined set to her jaw that he'd recognized in Maya Collins at the pharmacy. The coincidence of the name, the baby's birthmark, the timing of his visit to Bristol, none of it felt random to him. His phone rang, his assistant calling about the cancelled flight and postponed meetings. "Something's come up," he explained simply. "Family matters. I'll be staying in Bristol for a few days." As he ended the call, James made a decision. The healthcare program was real, but there was more to his interest in Maya and baby Zoe, much more than he had revealed in their brief encounter. The following morning, sunlight streamed through Maya's threadbare curtains, casting a golden glow across Zoe's crib. Maya had checked on her daughter throughout the night, relief washing over her each time she found the baby's temperature continuing to decrease. Now Zoe sat up in her crib, babbling happily and showing more energy than she had in days. The medicine was working. Maya showered quickly in the apartment's tiny bathroom, the lukewarm water a reminder of the building's aging infrastructure. As she dressed in her waitress uniform, a pale blue dress with a white apron, she eyed James Harrington's business card on the nightstand. Her shift at Greta's diner started in an hour, and she couldn't afford to miss work, not even with Zoe just beginning to recover. She'd arranged for Mrs. Patterson from downstairs to watch the baby, an arrangement that cost Maya nearly a quarter of her weekly earnings, but was still cheaper than formal childcare. "What do you think, Zoe Bear?" Maya asked, lifting her daughter from the crib. "Should Mommy call the mysterious Mr. Harrington?" Zoe responded by grabbing a strand of Maya's damp hair and tugging enthusiastically. With Zoe balanced on her hip, Maya dialed the number on the business card before she could lose her nerve. She expected to reach a secretary or assistant, prepared to leave a message and wait days for a response. Instead, James Harrington himself answered on the second ring. "Maya," he said, her name a statement rather than a question. "How is Zoe this morning?" Startled by his immediate recognition and direct question, Maya stammered, "She's better. The fever's down. The medicine helped." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Thank you for that. Regardless of anything else, thank you." "I'm glad to hear it," James replied, his tone warmer than it had been during their brief meeting. "Have you thought about the healthcare program?" "Yes, but I have questions. A lot of questions." Maya shifted Zoe to her other hip. "And, to be honest, after our conversation I did some asking around. You didn't mention that Bristol is your hometown." A heavy silence stretched between them before James spoke again. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in person. Are you free today?" Maya glanced at the clock on her wall, its minute hand steadily ticking toward her impending shift. "I work at Greta's diner from 9 to 3. I can't miss my shift. Greta's, James repeated, a note of recognition in his voice. On Main and Elm. I know it well. Would you be willing to meet after your shift? I could come to the diner. The thought of James Harrington in his expensive suit and with his CEO presence sitting in a booth at the modest diner where she worked brought a surreal quality to the conversation. 3:15, she agreed, and I'll need to bring Zoe. My sitter can only watch her during my shift. Of course. I look forward to seeing you both. After ending the call, Maya hurried through her morning routine, administering Zoe's next dose of antibiotics before bundling her downstairs to Mrs. Patterson's apartment. The elderly woman greeted them warmly, cooing at Zoe as Maya provided detailed instructions about the medication schedule. She's looking much better today, Mrs. Patterson observed. That fever had me worried. Me too, Maya admitted, but we got lucky. Someone helped with the medicine. She hesitated, then added, Actually, Mrs. Patterson, how long have you lived in Bristol? Oh, my whole life, dear. 68 years in this very neighborhood. Do you know anything about the Harrington family? The ones who live on Maple Hill? Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted, her eyes widening slightly. The Harringtons. Well, they keep to themselves these days, but they used to be quite involved in town affairs. Jonathan Harrington, that would be the father, was the most prominent attorney in Bristol for decades. His wife Margaret sat on every charitable board in town. She lowered her voice. There was that terrible business with their daughter, though. Such a tragedy. What exactly happened? Maya pressed. I've heard bits and pieces, but nothing specific. Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable. It's not really my place to gossip, dear. But if you're asking about Maya Harrington, yes, I remember her name was Maya too, such a coincidence. She was a sweet girl. Rebellious, perhaps, but sweet. Got involved with a boy her parents didn't approve of. When she became pregnant, they sent her to some private facility in Vermont to have the baby away from prying eyes. The older woman shook her head sadly. Neither survived the birth. It was about 20 years ago now. 20 years. The timing sent a chill through Maya. She thanked Mrs. Patterson and hurried to work, her mind churning with questions and suspicions. Greta's diner hummed with the usual morning crowd, retirees lingering over coffee, workers grabbing quick breakfasts before heading to their jobs, a few tourists passing through town. Maya moved through her shift mechanically, taking orders and delivering plates, while her thoughts remained fixed on her upcoming meeting with James. At precisely 3:15, just as Maya was hanging up her apron, the bell above the diner's door chimed. James Harrington entered, still in a suit, but a more casual one than yesterday. No tie, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked around the half-empty diner before spotting Maya and approaching. Thank you for meeting me, he said, sliding into a booth near the back. Will you be getting Zoe now? Mrs. Patterson is bringing her here, Maya explained, taking the seat opposite him. I wanted a few minutes to talk first, without distractions. James nodded, his expression unreadable. A waitress approached, Becky, who had taken over Maya's section, and James ordered coffee for himself and, after a questioning glance at Maya, hot tea for her. Once Becky retreated, Maya leaned forward. I want to know exactly what happened to your sister, she said bluntly, and I want to know why you really approached me yesterday, because I don't believe in coincidences that convenient. A flicker of admiration crossed James's face. Direct, I appreciate that. He took a deep breath. My sister, Maya Harrington, became pregnant at 16. The father was a local boy from, as my parents would say, the wrong side of town. When our parents found out, they were horrified at the potential scandal. My father was planning to run for state senate, and an unwed pregnant daughter didn't fit his image. James paused as Becky returned with their drinks, his fingers drumming a restless pattern on the tabletop. Once they were alone again, he continued. They sent her to a private medical facility in Vermont, telling everyone she was attending a prestigious arts program. I was at college, and they kept the truth from me initially. By the time I found out and tried to intervene, it was too late. His voice grew tight. There were complications during the delivery. The official story is that both Maya and the baby died. The official story? Maya repeated, catching his choice of words. James met her gaze steadily. I've had doubts for years. The facility where they sent her has since been shut down for ethical violations. Medical records were falsified. Bodies were cremated with suspicious haste. And when I tried to investigate further, I hit walls at every turn. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that 20 years ago my parents paid a great deal of money to make a problem disappear. I believe my sister may have died. Her death certificate appears legitimate, but I've never been convinced about her baby. James's expression darkened. The timing of your arrival in Bristol with a 9-month-old baby, your name, the birthmark on Zoe's wrist that matches a family trait, it raised questions I can't ignore. Maya felt as though the air had been sucked from the diner. Are you saying you think Zoe is your sister's baby? That's impossible. I gave birth to her. I was there. I'm not suggesting you weren't, James clarified quickly, but there are other possibilities. Children placed for adoption, paperwork manipulated. The facility where my sister was sent had connections to several adoption agencies. I've been tracking leads for years. Before Maya could respond, the diner's door opened again and Mrs. Patterson entered with Zoe in her arms. The baby squealed with delight upon seeing her mother, reaching out her small hands. Maya rose automatically to take her daughter, holding her close as Mrs. Patterson chatted briefly before departing. James watched them, his expression softening as Zoe settled comfortably in Maya's lap. I'm not trying to disrupt your life, he said quietly, but I need to know the truth. Would you be willing to help me find it? Maya looked down at Zoe, then back at James. And what happens if your suspicions are somehow right? What then? James shook his head. I don't know. But I do know that the healthcare program is real, regardless of anything else. Zoe deserves that much, at least. As Zoe babbled and played with the sugar packets on the table, Maya faced the most difficult decision of her life, whether to open the door to a past that might change everything, or turn away from the first genuine offer of help she'd received in years. I need time to think, she finally said, and proof that this healthcare program actually exists. James reached into his jacket and produced a folder. All the details are here. Take your time reviewing them. And Maya, he hesitated. Thank you for not dismissing this outright. I know how it must sound. What neither of them noticed was the elderly man seated 2 booths away, watching their interaction with intense interest. Jonathan Harrington, James's father, who had followed his son to the diner after learning of his unexpected return to Bristol. 3 days later, Maya sat cross-legged on her apartment floor surrounded by paperwork. The folder James had given her contained detailed information about the healthcare program, legitimate-looking documents outlining comprehensive coverage, testimonials from participants in similar initiatives his company had launched, contact information for the program coordinator. Everything seemed authentic, down to the legal disclosures and privacy statements. Zoe crawled nearby, her energy fully restored as the antibiotics continued to work. The fever had vanished completely, and with it Maya's immediate fear. Now she faced a different kind of uncertainty. She hadn't called James yet. Each time she reached for her phone, something held her back. A lifetime of learned caution, perhaps, or the unsettling implications of his theories about his sister's baby. The coincidences were striking, yes, but the scenario he suggested seemed pulled from a dramatic movie, not real life. A knock at the door startled her. It was nearly 7 in the evening and she wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole she saw a distinguished-looking older man in an expensive overcoat. "Who is it?" she called, one hand on the security chain. "Jonathan Harrington," came the reply. "James's father. I'd like to speak with you, Miss Collins." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. How had he found her address? She gathered Zoe into her arms before opening the door, keeping the security chain in place. Jonathan Harrington's appearance was imposing, tall like his son, with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, his posture rigid with authority. "May I come in? This isn't a conversation for hallways." "How did you find me?" Maya demanded. A thin smile crossed his face. "Bristol is a small town, Ms. Collins. Word travels, especially when my son cancels international business meetings to remain here." He glanced meaningfully at Zoe. "I believe we have matters to discuss that concern both our families." Against her better judgment, Maya unlatched the chain and stepped back. Jonathan entered, his gaze sweeping critically over the modest apartment before settling on her. "I'll be direct," he said. Remaining standing through, Maya gestured toward the single armchair. "Whatever James has told you about his sister and her child is based on grief and wishful thinking. He never accepted Maya's death and has spent years chasing shadows. This healthcare program is simply his latest attempt to atone for something that wasn't his fault. Maya shifted Zoe to her hip. Mr. Harrington, your son has been nothing but kind to me and my daughter. The program he's offering would make a real difference in our lives. And I'm prepared to make an even more significant difference, Jonathan countered smoothly, removing an envelope from his coat pocket. Inside is a cashier's check for $50,000. It's yours with no strings attached on one condition. You leave Bristol immediately and cease all contact with my son. Maya stared at the envelope, momentarily speechless. $50,000, more money than she'd ever seen at once, would transform their lives. She could move to a better apartment, perhaps even put a down payment on a small house in a less expensive area. She could create a savings account for Zoe's education. The security it would provide was almost unimaginable. Why? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you pay me to disappear? Jonathan's expression remained impassive. My son is the CEO of a successful pharmaceutical company. He has responsibilities, a reputation to maintain. This fixation on his sister's death has already cost him one marriage and countless opportunities. I won't stand by while he derails his life yet again over misplaced sentimentality. So this has nothing to do with whether Zoe might actually be connected to your family, Maya challenged, watching his face carefully. A flicker of something, anger, fear, crossed Jonathan's features before his mask of control returned. That's preposterous. The resemblance James thinks he sees is his imagination, nothing more. Then why offer me money to leave? Why not just let him run his tests, prove there's no connection, and move on? Jonathan stepped closer, his imposing height forcing Maya to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. Because the mere suggestion is enough to create scandal. Because my son doesn't need to reopen old wounds. Because you and your daughter deserve a fresh start without being entangled in our family's past. His voice softened slightly. The money is real, Ms. Collins. What James is offering is a fantasy. Maya glanced down at Zoe, who was watching Jonathan with curious eyes. The birthmark on her wrist, a small crescent-shaped mark that Maya had always thought looked like a tiny moon, was clearly visible. Jonathan's gaze followed hers, lingering on the mark for a moment too long. You recognize it, don't you? Maya said quietly. The birthmark. Jonathan's jaw tightened. A coincidence. Nothing more. If it's just a coincidence, then you wouldn't mind if I called James right now, told him about your visit and your offer. Maya reached for her phone. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Jonathan said, his tone suddenly icy. Consider your situation carefully, Ms. Collins. A single mother with limited resources, working as a waitress, living in an apartment that, forgive my bluntness, barely meets code requirements. How difficult would it be for someone with my connections to create problems for you? A word to your landlord about unauthorized modifications to the apartment, a suggestion to child services about questionable living conditions. The threat hung in the air between them. Maya felt cold anger replacing her initial shock. Are you threatening to have my daughter taken away if I don't take your money and leave town? I'm merely pointing out realities, Jonathan replied smoothly. The check is genuine. The offer stands until noon tomorrow. He placed the envelope on her small kitchen counter. Choose wisely, Ms. Collins. After he left, Maya sank onto the floor, cradling Zoe close as her mind raced. Jonathan's veiled threats confirmed one thing. There was substance to James's suspicions. Something in the Harrington family's past was worth $50,000 to keep buried. She reached for her phone and dialed James's number. Maya, he answered immediately. I was just about to call you. Have you had a chance to review the program details? Your father was just here, she said without preamble. He offered me $50,000 to leave town and never contact you again. A sharp intake of breath was followed by several seconds of silence. Where are you now? James finally asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. At my apartment. Pack a bag for you and Zoe. Enough for a few days. I'm coming to get you in 20 minutes. James, I don't think— Maya, please, he interrupted, urgency in his tone. My father doesn't make idle threats. Whatever he said to you, whatever he implied, he'll follow through. I know him too well. Fear coiled in Maya's stomach as she recalled Jonathan's menacing suggestions about child services. Where would we go? I have a lake house about an hour from here. It's private, secure. We can figure out our next steps there, away from my father's influence. James paused. I understand if you don't trust me yet, but right now I'm asking you to trust that I want to protect you and Zoe from whatever my father might do. After ending the call, Maya moved quickly, packing essentials for herself and Zoe into a duffel bag. The envelope containing the cashier's check remained untouched on the counter. As she worked, her mind replayed Jonathan's threats and James's warnings. Two powerful men, father and son, locked in some decades-old conflict, and somehow she and Zoe had become caught in the middle. By the time James arrived, Maya had made her decision. She left the check on the counter and walked out of the apartment without looking back, Zoe secure in her carrier and the duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Whatever truth lay buried in the Harrington family's past, she was now committed to uncovering it, for Zoe's sake and for her own. James waited in his car, a different vehicle than the chauffeured sedan from their first meeting, this one a less conspicuous dark blue SUV. He helped secure Zoe's carrier into the back seat, his movements efficient but gentle. As they drove away from the apartment building, Maya spotted a black sedan parked across the street, its driver watching them intently. Your father has someone following you, she observed, nodding toward the sedan now pulling into traffic behind them. James checked the rearview mirror and grimaced. Not surprising. Don't worry, I know these roads better than his hired help. He made a sudden turn onto a side street, then another, navigating a complex route through residential neighborhoods before merging onto the highway heading north out of Bristol. The lake house belonged to my grandmother, James explained as they drove. It's not in my father's name or the family trust. He can't access it without my permission. Maya looked out the window at the darkening landscape, the familiar outlines of Bristol receding behind them. Why is he so determined to keep us apart? What is he afraid of? James's hands tightened on the steering wheel. My father has built his life around appearances and control. The scandal of my sister's pregnancy was bad enough. If there's any possibility that her child survived, that the official story was a lie, it would mean he's been covering up the truth for 20 years. But why would he do that? Why not just let your sister have her baby and give it up for adoption if they were so concerned about appearances? James was quiet for a long moment. That's what I've never understood, unless... He glanced at Maya, his expression troubled. Unless there was something more at stake than just family reputation. As they continued north, the highway narrowing to a two-lane road that wound through dense forest, neither spoke again. The questions hanging between them were too weighty, the possibilities too disturbing to voice aloud. What they didn't know was that another car had picked up their trail after they'd lost the first tail. This one driven not by one of Jonathan's hired men, but by someone with a much deeper connection to the mystery surrounding Maya Harrington and her baby. Someone who had been waiting 20 years for the truth to finally emerge. The lake house emerged from the darkness like a vision from another era. A sprawling cedar structure with a wraparound porch, nestled among towering pines at the edge of a still black lake. James parked the SUV in a covered carport and quickly ushered Maya and Zoe inside, securing doors and activating an alarm system before turning on lights. It's beautiful, Maya murmured, taking in the rustic elegance of the main room with its stone fireplace and exposed wooden beams. Zoe had fallen asleep during the drive, her small face peaceful in the carrier. My grandmother was an artist, James explained, moving to light the fireplace. This was her retreat. I spent summers here as a child. He nodded toward a hallway. There's a bedroom at the end with its own bathroom. You and Zoe can take that one. After settling Zoe in the bedroom, Maya returned to find James in the kitchen, preparing tea. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled up, his CEO persona momentarily set aside. For the first time she noticed the family resemblance between him and his father, the same strong jawline and broad shoulders, though James's features were softened by something gentler in his expression. Tomorrow, he said, handing her a steaming mug, I'd like to run a DNA test, a simple cheek swab for both you and Zoe. I have a contact at a private lab who can expedite the results. Maya wrapped her hands around the warm mug. You really believe Zoe could be your sister's child? I believe it's possible, James corrected. The timing, the birthmark, my father's reaction, it all points to something beyond coincidence. He hesitated. There's something I haven't told you, something I discovered years after my sister's death. He moved to a desk in the corner of the room, unlocking a drawer and removing a weathered leather journal. This was Maya's diary. My mother gave it to me after the funeral, thinking it might bring comfort. Instead, it raised more questions. He opened the journal to a marked page and handed it to Maya. The handwriting was youthful, looping letters dotted with hearts, but the content was sobering. April 18th. Dad found out about the baby today. I've never seen him so angry. He and Mom are sending me to some place in Vermont. They say I can come back after, that no one will know, but I heard them talking. Something about the baby being valuable because of blood type or genetics or something. Tyler would never agree to this. I have to find a way to contact him before they send me away. Maya looked up from the journal. Who was Tyler? The father of my sister's baby, Tyler Reynolds. His family worked at the marina near our summer home. My parents forbade the relationship, but Maya was stubborn. A fond smile briefly crossed James's face. After she died, Tyler disappeared from Bristol. I tried to find him over the years, but it was as if he vanished completely. Maya turned the page of the journal, but the remaining pages were blank. This is the last entry? James nodded. She was sent to Vermont the next day. Whatever happened after that, she never had a chance to write it down. A soft cry from the bedroom signaled Zoe's awakening. Maya returned to find her daughter, fussing in the unfamiliar surroundings. As she lifted Zoe into her arms, soothing her with gentle words, she noticed something she hadn't before. The same blue eyes that had looked at her so coldly from Jonathan Harrington's face now gazed up at her from her daughter's. When she returned to the main room, James was standing by the large windows overlooking the lake, his posture tense. "Someone's coming," he said quietly, nodding toward the distant glow of headlights moving along the private road to the house. "Your father?" "Possibly." "Stay here." James moved to a cabinet, retrieving what looked like a small security monitor. He pressed several buttons, activating exterior cameras. The approaching vehicle came into view. An aging pickup truck, not the luxury sedan Jonathan would use. James's breath caught. "It can't be," he whispered, staring at the screen. "Who is it?" Maya asked, moving closer with Zoe in her arms. Before James could answer, the truck parked alongside their SUV and a man stepped out, middle-aged, weathered by years of outdoor work, but still recognizable to James. "Tyler Reynolds," he said, disbelief coloring his voice. "After all these years." James deactivated the alarm and opened the front door as Tyler approached the porch. The two men regarded each other silently for a long moment before Tyler spoke. "I saw you in town with her," he said, nodding toward Maya, visible through the doorway. "Word travels fast in Bristol. I had to see for myself." James stepped aside. "Come in, Tyler. It's been a long time." Inside, introductions were made quickly, Tyler's gaze lingering on Zoe with an intensity that made Maya instinctively hold her daughter closer. "I've been watching the Harringtons for 20 years, Tyler explained, declining James's offer of a seat. "Waiting for something, anything, that might lead to the truth about what happened to Maya and our baby." "The official report said they both died during childbirth," James said. Tyler's laugh was bitter. "That's what they wanted everyone to believe. But I was there that night at the facility in Vermont. I'd tracked Maya down, was planning to help her escape." His voice thickened with emotion. "I heard her screaming, then a baby crying. I tried to get in, but security caught me, beat me bloody and dumped me miles away. By the time I got back, they told me Maya had died from complications, and the baby with her." "But you didn't believe them," Maya said softly. "I saw a nurse leaving that night with a baby. She got into a car with a man I later identified as a lawyer who worked for Jonathan Harrington." Tyler turned to James. "How your father paid to have the baby taken and placed for adoption, somewhere the scandal would never reach Bristol." James sank into a chair, the weight of this revelation visible in his expression. "And you think Zoe could be that child?" "I don't know," Tyler admitted. "But when I saw her with you in town, saw that birthmark—" He stopped, emotion choking his words. "Maya had that same mark. So did my mother. It runs in our family." Maya looked down at Zoe, sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the tangled history surrounding her existence. "I was told I was abandoned as a newborn," she said quietly. "Raised in foster care in Portland. When I got pregnant with Zoe, the doctor said something unusual about my blood type being rare. I never thought anything of it." Tyler's head snapped up. Maya had a rare blood type too. That's what her journal entry meant. The baby would have the same rare type, valuable for medical research. Jonathan had connections to pharmaceutical companies even then. James stood abruptly. We need those DNA tests. Tomorrow. For all of us. He looked from Maya to Tyler. Whatever the truth is, we'll face it together. As dawn broke over the lake, Maya stood on the porch, watching the mist rise from the water. Behind her, through the window, she could see James and Tyler talking intently. Two men connected by loss and united in their search for truth. Zoe played on a blanket between them, occasionally reaching up toward Tyler with curious hands. The past 24 hours had turned Maya's world upside down, yet somehow, standing here in this moment, she felt a strange sense of peace. Whether Zoe was connected to the Harrington family or not, these people had already changed their lives for the better. For the first time since Zoe's birth, Maya didn't feel completely alone. The future remained uncertain, but as she watched the sun breaking through the morning mist, Maya allowed herself to hope for answers, for justice, and perhaps finally for the sense of family she'd always longed for.